All right, let's talk COVID money, right? How did Erie County spend or allocate the American Rescue Plan Act dollars that we received from that federal stimulus package? We're going to get into that today. Couple quick things. Number one, I am not an investigative journalist. This is not a gotcha video. This is not where is this money? We couldn't account for it. We've seen that most of this money we have been able to, through all of our deep research with AI, going out to not only the county site, but looking at all the nonprofits and all these kind of sub grants that were given out. I think we've done a pretty good job. There's a lot of really small nonprofits that just don't have their stuff on their website. I don't think anything it's not malicious or anything crazy or some conspiracy. It's just, again, they're small. The other thing is this is I'm not an investigative journalist. I'm not going to, fill out FOIA requests and Freedom of Information Act to find every dollar, right? And the other thing is I'm not going to give an opinion on if that was money well spent or not. I'm just going to tell you this is what we found. This is kind of where the money went. And I think it's kind of interesting on how the thought process went. All right, let's get into this. So what was ARPA? What was the American Rescue Plan Act? That was a $1.9 trillion kind of government spending and stimulus package that was passed by President Biden in March of 2021. Out of that, $350 billion went to state and local governments, right? So this was kind of passed down through a formula that they used based on population, and it was used to give municipalities a lot of flexibility in how it was spent, right? So replace lost revenue because you don't have any tax dollars coming in. How do we support public health? How do we have the kind of those once in a lifetime type infrastructure projects, right? So all of that was allowed to happen for this economic recovery. Erie County received $52.4 million. Two payments, one in 2021, one in 22, both of $26.2 million, right? Out of that, it all had to have been obligated or kind of spoken for by December 31st of 2024. It all must be spent and done, right, by the end of this year, December 31st, 2026. And we'll get into kind of where we are with that, but let's break down how we spent this. So there's kind of five pieces of the donut, right? That are the kind of main contributors of who received the most money. So number one was economic recovery, right? So this kept, businesses afloat. It prevented layoffs. How do we reopen safely? We did a lot of industrial site preparation for business when we started to open back up. We had kind of, again, a real chance to do that with these dollars. Next was revenue replacement, about $11 million. Again, this kept the county going. This kept services going. This kept Pleasant Ridge Manor fully operational during, what could have been a disaster if those dollars weren't there because a lot of tax dollars were not coming in. Infrastructure, right? Again, we talk about those once in a lifetime type projects that a lot of municipalities just could not afford to do without it, right? It's about 7 million or 13% of our money went to that. So this was water, sewer, stormwater. So there were repairs on 35 of 38, or about 92% of municipalities in the county. This also did a lot of broadband as well. So that was kind of cool. And then Diverse Erie, again, I know that's because of what has happened with the county executive and county council. There's always a little bit of controversy here, but again, this is kind of what happened. Diverse Erie got a $5 million allotment. It came in two. One was $3.5 million. That was $1.5 million. And this was supported to help support Black, Indigenous, and people of color owned businesses through grants and leverage loans, as we kind of went through COVID. Public health then, $4.25 million, or about 8%. And again, that was EMS training facilities. How do we kind of get everybody back with masks and all that? And then again, it's been in the paper lately, right? The tiny home village, right? That is still not operational, that the new county executive says, hopefully by the end of this year, believe that's what you said on the Joel Natale show. Again, but that was created with ARPA money, which I didn't know. So that's kind of cool. Okay. So out of all of those kind of things that we gave money to, how broken down was about a third each. So, if we look at, if we spend $1, 31 cents of it went to grants to outside organizations, right? Nonprofits, businesses to keep them afloat, first responders, EMS. 36% went to fund capital projects, right? The land preparation, the sewer, the water, all of that, and in these brownfield cleanups as well. And then 33% went to actually keep the county functioning and keep services going, sustaining the nursing home at Pleasant Ridge Manor, EMS and other core services. So again, that's kind of how it was allocated out. So again, we kind of talked about, the two tranches has to be obligated by 2024, has to be spent by the end of this year. What is the progress of that? Well, latest report that I could find and we could find was August of 2025, where 80% of the money was already spent, right? So 41.9 million was spent, and then that left another 10.5 million. That's already all but spoken for. There's projects that money's going to, and we are on track to spend everything by the end of this year. If you look at the budget that I did, the video I did on the county budget, you'll see that there's just a very allotment left, kind of even in the general fund and kind of how that's working. So again, that money's gone. Okay, so again, we talked about our donut, right? The economic recovery, revenue replacement, infrastructure, diverse Erie, and public health, right? Those were the 5 main pieces. Let's go a little bit deeper into some of that, right? So the first, again, the biggest part of the donut was economic recovery, right? So the breakdown of that kind of 35.7 million is 24% or 8.4 million went to direct grants, 17 million went to capital program investments, and then 10.3 was kind of admin or oversight. So the major spending areas were site readiness. So this is, it went to the Erie County Redevelopment Authority for acquisition and development of 4 rural locations, Union City Borough, Fairview, Harbor Creek, and Northeast. It covered infrastructure build outs that, tried to be, development ready. That's the water, the sewer, retention basins, broadband. So all of that kind of played into the site readiness piece of it. And then there was some transformative grants, right, that went out. Now, again, this supported 137 nonprofits. We were able to talk and find most of these, but there's some that were pretty small. But again, this is for, to help keep a lot of the nonprofits kind of going. And then there was 3 million, which was a childcare initiative, right? There was also a Erie County Gaming Revenue Authority match of that 3 million. So we had 5.5 million total, right? So the results of that are pretty good, right? Over 3,000 children are now in much stronger early intervention in learning programs. 302 educators we would have lost, right? And we retained through higher wages. So again, I think that, we can all agree to disagree. And we know what's going on in Minnesota and Minneapolis, but at this point, when this money was given out, how kind of tenuous thing was. And I think it made sense. Penn State Barron received 2.5 million. And then again, the Quincy site on Erie's east side, which was that former paper company, we had to get rid of asbestos and lead, and kind of, it was located next to homes and had a homeless encampment, and it was bad, right? So that was now demolished and remediated. And then the EMI site that is honestly going up pretty darn fast. That was, given to them to kind of help and build that out. Shuttered venues, right? And we don't remember that. I mean, it's kind of hard to realize, when you look back, that there was a lot of places that were totally closed, right? Especially entertainment, right? So theaters, museums, golf courses, bowling alleys, right? They needed money to stay afloat because no one was allowed to go there, right? So again, a lot of them couldn't get federal funding. So that's kind of how it kind of parsed into them. And then again, sustaining our local kind of artist groups, right? So the Children's Museum, the Erie Playhouse, they were given one-time grants of $111,000. The Erie Art Museum, the Philharmonic, right? So that's kind of where a lot of that money went. And then we have that next piece, right? Revenue replacement. So where did this money go? Pleasant Ridge Manor took a lot of it, right? So 63% of that entire kind of pot of money is the county-owned skilled nursing facility on West Ridge Road, right? So that kept that afloat. And then we did have a general fund transfer of like 3.7 to kind of keep the county going. And then some money went to kind of EMS. Okay, we talked about kind of infrastructure, right? And a lot of this, this water, sewer, stormwater, 35 out of 38 municipalities, 92% coverage, received some of this money. So that went, the vast majority of that went 6.16 million went there. Project Neptune, which I know a lot of people love to fight and argue about, 1.5 million. And then we did have a $50,000 kind of payment for broadband. Okay, diverse Erie. And again, we can have an argument here, but I'm not here to do that. Here's just kind of how that money was spent. And to be honest, I mean, their numbers look really good, right? So diverse Erie received $5 million, right? two allotments, one 3.5 million, one 1.5 million. But the result, right, they're saying a 1.6x return. So that first 3.5 million was invested, generated 5.7 million of economic impact, almost $200,000 in new taxes, 32 new jobs in 54 businesses across 54 businesses and nonprofits, right? And then again, here's just some of the other organizations that they have invested in with that money. Right, everything from mini grants to kind of larger organizations, right, like the East Side Renaissance, right, looking at some of those underserviced and underutilized areas. And again, the other cool thing was they gave $500,000 in seed capital to launch kind of a small business fund for people of color, people that have been kind of underserviced by a lot of the funding that has actually happened out there. So the Erie County Redevelopment Authority, Bridgeway Capital, Ben Franklin kind of all came together and put a large pool of money in. That $500,000 was kind of the first loss prevention, right? So everybody felt a little better, like, hey, we'll take that first lien, right? So 1.8 million was kind of the total amount for that, which again has a huge ripple effect that loans that have been coming back out for that. So again, say what you want. I think it was handled really well, and I think it makes total sense. And the proof is in the numbers. All right. Public health, where that money went again, skilled nursing labs, fire, EMS. I think that all kind of makes sense. Again, we won an award for the small houses, but we still don't have them up yet, right? But again, we're hopeful that kind of happens here soon. So again, what is the kind of the final takeaway, and what do the numbers say on the impact that this spending had? So, over 3,000 children became in stronger kind of learning environments because of that funding. Over 300 people were housed, with some of this funding, right? There's 73 new EMT scholarships, 31 fire departments. Pleasant Ridge Manor being fully funded, I think, was a no-brainer and something that was awesome. We did a ton of work on some of these really industrial sites, right, that are now starting to turn, and you're starting to see what's happening downtown. You're starting to see what's happening on 12th Street with EMI. You're starting to see, again, what's happening on the Bayfront. There's a huge, even not to get off topic, but a huge, kind of talk about, the old Coke plant becoming maybe a naval warship builder. So we'll kind of keep our eye on that as well. So again, there's a lot that kind of went out. And I think while a lot of people argue and complain and say money shouldn't have been spent there, I think when you look at the overall plan, right, and I know there's still a lot of argument of what happened with the old county executive and county council and kind of how things were kind of figured out. And I think, this really did come to support Erie County. And overall, I think, kind of hats off. I think they did a pretty good job. All right. Thank you very much for watching. We will be back hopefully in a couple days with the city of Erie, which is a whole different thing. It's it's about $70 million that the city received. And there's some interesting things with that too. So thanks for watching.